Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from Global Alts in Miami by iConnections. Joining me for this segment, we have Hunter Horsley, he's CEO of Bitwise. We're here to discuss how financial advisors are thinking about portfolio allocation as it relates to digital assets and other types of alternatives. Hunter, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks. And we were discussing this off camera before, how the environment as it relates to digital assets has really evolved over the past 12 to 18 months. What are some of the key trends that you see driving this?
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example from a conversation at the event today. A very large firm, $100 billion firm. They've been following the space for the past 3 years. 2 years ago, they wanted to do something, but then the space went through a bear market and there were some bad headlines around it, and there are a lot of other things going on for them, so they put it on hold. And 2 weeks ago, they decided to pick the project back up and figure out what they're going to do about putting crypto in portfolios over the next 3 months. And I think that's indicative of what we're seeing across a lot of firms today, which is they had thought about crypto, they'd put it on hold, and even just over the last few weeks, many firms have picked it back up. So it's a changing environment.
It certainly is, and I would imagine that the macro landscape has something to do with it, but then it's always going to come down to what investors are demanding or looking for, hence the pickup in advisor momentum as well.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, another thing that I think is apparent to a lot of people is the new presidential administration. The new White House has a completely different viewpoint on the space than ever before in America. So, you know, people know that Bitcoin's been around for 16 years, but there's never been a constructive regulatory environment or constructive White House and administration around it. We have that for the first time as of a week ago. And that's made a huge impact on people's perception that, okay, it's safe to explore this for my clients, it's safe to explore this for my portfolio. To put a number on that, a few months ago after the election, we surveyed financial advisors and said, we asked them questions about the election results and their views on crypto. And 56% said that they, as a result of the election, are now more likely to invest in crypto. So that puts a stat to something I think is quite intuitive, which is the regulatory environment, regulatory uncertainty has kept people from feeling that it was a reasonable space to come into over the past many years, and that's changed this year. And so I think that's another important backdrop to why we're starting to see a lot of firms say, let's come up with a plan and let's do something.
I mean, that's a great distinction that you make, because we really weren't talking about it on a national level until the beginning of 2024, when it became part of Trump's platform. For better or worse, it was almost like it was a taboo subject to be touched by regulators, because is it a commodity? Is it an equity? Do we know what it is? How is it going to be established? And now it's at the forefront where we need to put some framework around it. People care. There's more exposure and education to it. So when you think about your outlook, 2025 and beyond, whether it's technological advancements that are impacting the space or just more knowledge and interest, do you think the trajectory, the momentum continues?
Absolutely. And I don't think it'll be a linear progression of the last few years. I think the door has burst wide open, and I don't think that everything is going to happen this year, but I think a lot of things are going to happen this year. I think you're going to see very large financial institutions announcing services, approving it for clients. I think you're going to see large $10 billion plus wealth management firms offering models to their clients, approving access to it. I think you'll see more and more stories of pensions, including digital assets in their portfolio. Another fascinating dynamic, Jill, Bitwise has been around for 8 years. So we've lived through a lot. I had a lot less gray hair when we started. And today there are already 5,000 wealth management teams, firms, branches, family offices that own a Bitwise product. I think less than what I could count on one hand have put out a press release or bragged about investing in crypto on LinkedIn. So I think to date, a lot of firms that have done things in the space have been very quiet about it. They've been happy to invest or happy to put it in portfolios, but don't really talk about it publicly. I think that's also going to change this year. I think you're going to have people come out of the woodwork that have been invested for a few years that want to take credit for having been ahead of the curve. I think people are going to feel that it's finally safe to talk about it publicly. So I think you'll see more commentary about it from investors. Again, I think you'll see more approvals, more financial institutions entering the space. And then to turn away from that vantage point, I think you'll see IPOs kick up. There are maybe 20 crypto firms, crypto businesses that are worth over $1 billion in the United States. Most of them are private. And so I think there's a perception that it's a relatively small industry or it's a backwater industry. But there are big companies And I think some of them will start to go public, and that will open the perception of how the space is professionalized over the last few years. And then, of course, AI is colliding into public blockchains in the space, and there's a lot of interesting technology stories which we could talk about. But I think you're going to see progress on a lot of fronts with this space. I think the door has opened at last, and it's entering the mainstream context.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up a couple of points there when you think about, okay, perhaps we're going to see capital formation in the IPO markets as it relates to bringing these companies public.
Yeah.
I think there was a very strong ethos about the decentralized nature of it. And you're seeing that alleviate itself a bit. Just like with TradFi and DeFi and the integration. We're talking about integration now. Asset managers understand terms like custody.
Yes.
And market infrastructure, and a lot of these terms. There's a lot of cross currents now. So it feels more natural. And I think this absolute dividing line of what ethos you are or you aren't. If you want institutional adoption, well, you're going to have to be able to bend in certain ways. And I think that's a big barrier that was crossed too.
I totally agree with you. I think you're going to see cross-pollination. I think you're going to see integrations. And I would also say, sometimes it feels like this crypto phenomenon is this crazy new thing. We've never seen it before. But we have seen it before. There are companies like MongoDB, SQL, where there's open source software, and then there's a company that sits alongside of it that provides services to enterprises using that open source software. And it's a marriage between the open source software and a corporate entity that's providing services. And so I think that gets at what we'll see more and more of, which is I think you'll see financial services companies using open source DeFi protocols, maybe to tokenize an asset, maybe to syndicate a bond. There's a firm that has done over 6 billion of HELOC syndication on a blockchain, but it's still a company. It's called Figure. So I think you'll see a lot of these stories where there's a company involved and there's a protocol involved. And I think that's a very natural future and dynamic. And again, it exists in a lot of parts of the technology industry already.
It does. It feels like we're going to more of a hybrid operating environment, whether you're thinking about, okay, we're either all in the cloud or we're not. Now you're starting to see, okay, we can work with both worlds.
Yes.
And the hybrid environment offers redundancies and some protections in other ways versus either or. So, I mean, getting a little bit off topic here, but it feels as if technology is really adopting more of a hybrid stance versus we have to go from one technology to the next and we don't look back.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that also gets at, I think the industry itself is also growing up. Even the technologists, crypto is this sort of sometimes confusing space because you have financial services people, you have technology people, you have philosophical people, and they all come together on this one subject, and it's chaos and it's confusing. But I think writ large, the space is maturing. They're understanding what's productive, what's less productive. They're understanding the approaches, the conversations. And so I do think you'll see more hybrid approaches, more instances of the technology fitting into existing services and products. So I'm very optimistic that we're entering a moment now where it's not just going to be mainstream for investors, but also mainstream for businesses and companies to utilize the power of these technologies. And I think it might end up being a journey a little bit like the iPhone. If you remember when the iPhone first came out in 2007, I had a BlackBerry. A lot of people have BlackBerries. Yeah. I said, who needs this thing? This is ridiculous. There's no keyboard. I can't send email. It's a toy. And you wake up 10 years later and Goldman's giving it to employees as the corporate phone. And I think that is a bit of what we're going to see with digital assets now and public blockchains. They're just going to quietly work their way into the infrastructure stacks. They're going to quietly integrate and introduce new solutions. And I think we'll wake up in a few years and say, wow, it really happened, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the correlation with that scenario is certainly present. Hunter, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me from Global Alts. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.